All right, everybody, welcome to the Jmap and Extra session at IETF in Vienna and remotely. Thanks for joining us. There's a few people here in the room, probably a few more remotely. I'm having to pop up here to this microphone to speak because the table microphone is dead. So I'm just going to drag this back down to the desk while I read through these initial slides, and then we'll get straight down to business. So this is the slides we've been given here. We're doing both Jmap and Extra. The plan is to do Jmap first. There's about 75 minutes of that, and then about 45 minutes of Extra according to what we've put into the agenda, but of course things will change as we go. The note well, I think everyone in this room has been in additional sessions this morning, so you've probably already seen this. For everyone remote, everything you do here is covered under the note well, so you have to follow the IETF's processes and policies. Little tips for people in the room. There are QR codes all over the place that you can scan from your mobile device, or you can use the little mobile device on-site tool thing. Otherwise, you can log in with the full MeetEcho client if you would prefer. Either way, logging into MeetEcho is the way that you indicate that you're present for Blue Sheets. Everyone remote obviously has already done that. Cool. Links to resources. You can find all of this directly from Data Tracker, so I won't spend long on this page. Here's the agenda for the Jmap session. So planning to start with Jmap S-MIME because that's with the editors already, then work our way through the active drafts with each person speaking to what's happening with that, and finally review our milestones, and then we will do the same for Extra, starting with things that are further along and going back to things that are less far along. So with that said, any agenda bashing before we get started? All right, my co-chair is remote here. Jim, if you want to take notes or put snarky comments, whatever you want to do, that's all good. Give us a wave. Nice to see you. Awesome. All right, so the first on our list here is the S-MIME. Do I have any slides for that? I have S-MIME signing, but not for Jmap S-MIME. Anything to say on that? Alexei, if you want to pop up.
Yeah, Alexei Melenkov. Not much really. I think all the feedback is addressed. I think I copied the old Niels convention for underscores and stars around various elements, and RFC editor is asking what is this. So I did my best to replace it with the XML v3 emphasis and strong elements. Hopefully I did it correctly, and so there is just a few minor formatting things and it should be done. Maybe even announced this week.
Cool. Fantastic. Thank you. Next is actually me with Jmap Blob. So I'm just going to stay seated in this chair since there's a camera pointed straight at me anyway. I put in quite a few changes based mainly on Jim's feedback and discussion with Neil about the fact that blob set was not really quite the right thing for it because there's no state for blobs and there's no update or destroy, there's only create. So blob upload is basically a set that can only do creates. It still creates creation IDs because you need to have them to be able to back reference, which is the large point of doing inline blob creates. I also removed the catenate, both because what even does that mean? Nobody knows, and because it makes it much simpler if it's always just a list of byte sources, octet sources in order that you append together to create a final result, which could be 0 if you're uploading the nothing file, or it could be 1 or more sources. Also made the capabilities simpler. You used to be able to specify a maximum upload size for blob, and if you didn't specify it there, then it should get it from the upload endpoint, and if you didn't specify it there, like, no, either you specify it or the client can just assume it can send what it likes, and the server will reject if it wants to anyway. What is that? This is the example. As you can see, it looks beautiful. It works on my computer. Interoperability is a thing. No. LibreOffice, Breakfast of Champions. All right, so what you can see here is that instead of it saying create and then an ID and then just text, data as text, it's got a data and then an array and then the data as text item in it as one hash within an array. It does. Are we done? This was in working group last call. It's a fairly significant change, but it's been posted for 2 weeks now, and I told everyone on the list. So if you have feedback, please send feedback. If not, I'll ask Jim to push the button and send it off to the editors. Does anyone here have feedback? Yep. Feel free to push the button, pop up, whatever you want. Just go talk at the microphone. It's fine. Just tell people who you are. You don't need to do this. Oh, there you go. You beat Alexi by a millisecond. So you're first, Hans-Jörg.
So yeah, basically, sorry. The basic things I looked at was a little bit also from a migration perspective. So I wondered, there is this, the way I understood the blob get thing is that I could specify which properties to get from the server, right?
You can specify the range that you want from a blob.
Exactly. So my question would be, because it was not explicitly written down, if I think in theory I could only include size and would just get the size of the blob, right?
Yes, you can get the size of the blob and you can get a range from within the blob.
Okay, because it might be worthwhile, in my opinion, to point that explicitly out, because this is the only single operation which will only give you metadata from the server without having the server to touch the actual files on disk.
Okay.
And this is an operation typically we do, for instance, during some scanning kind of operation. Exactly.
Yep.
And this is the reason why I would say it also for implementers to have that in mind. Yeah.
Cool.
And second related thing is actually, so the question is, would there be a case actually for a list all blob thing? In case you want to have a full migration from one mailbox to the other one, obviously you could get that from the actual items where you get the blob references from. But sometimes it's more handy also for some reasons for polarization or so. If you
Oh. Let's check that.
While we're stopped, who was speaking? I didn't catch your name. Still didn't hear that.
All right. Let me bring you the microphone. Here you go.
Okay, so this is Hans-Jörg Habel, hello. Should I repeat everything, or? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, I keep it short. So I have basically two remarks. So first remark is on blob get. As far as I interpret the RFC, it's possible to explicitly mention the properties to retrieve from the server. So it should be possible, for instance, also to only retrieve the size, which is basically a metadata, and sometimes it comes handy to only get that data before deciding maybe, for getting knowledge about the size, calculating some duration and so on, without having the server read the file physically or something like that. So it would be helpful, I think, to point out this possibility also for implementers to make that distinction in their implementation, to make it more efficient to read size only. That was my first remark. And the second question was if it makes sense to have something like a list all blobs in order to have the possibility to read all blobs from the server in order to transfer them somewhere else, for instance.
I need to come and grab this. I think this is the one that works.
Yep.
And
I
that
got
one's dead,
confused.
Yeah?
I got confused about who was who because Hans-Jörg was listed by MeetEcho as being remote. So.
Yeah, it's because he's on the full client. MeetEcho doesn't know if you're actually remote; it just knows which client you're using.
I understand.
So, to respond to that second one, yes, it would be possible to add a blob query, I imagine. Servers might reject it, but they can reject anything. Certainly the ability to look through everything. It could be quite a lot of data, but yep. Okay, I think Alexi is next. Let me give you back the microphone.
I'm sorry, can I be the naughty child in the room that haven't read the latest draft? I'm not always. Okay, so I think taking out catenate for simplicity is probably fine. Can you just remind me what the use case for it was? Was it like Imap catenate kind of case? Right.
So just, I think, to answer that, what I did by taking out catenate was made everything a catenate. So instead of having a type that was either a single item or a type that was a list of items, it's always a list. And so your list may have only one item in it. But instead of having a key called catenate that meant concatenate multiple of these together, everything's just a list. We good now?
Hello? Hello? I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Okay. Fine. I think that's the right way to do it then. Perfect.
Cool. Next on the list was Neil.
Nope. Yeah, I just want to say I'm not sure about having a blob/query, and I don't know that's a good idea. Like the point of this draft was to be able to do kind of in-band, upload and download of blobs. So it's kind of the same functionality you already have, but just without having to have a separate connection for those if for some reason that's what you needed. But blob/query is quite a different functionality, and also is a bit weird with, blob's not a data type in the same way a normal managed object is. You don't have kind of state strings to be able to do change tracking and stuff. I don't know. It just seems a lot of extra stuff to add without really thinking about it.
Yeah, I guess to respond to that a little bit, it's not going to be that they can change. Blobs are immutable. So it's more just a list of all the blobs that are on the server, including ones that maybe aren't referenced by anything. If you're using this as a replication mechanism between a system and a hot standby type of thing, then doing an rsync type situation where you fetch the full list and then grab blobs that aren't copied across would allow you to do a failover safely. So I imagine that's the kind of case that's being looked at here. The main issue with it is it's a lot of data, so you'd have to page it or something, and because there's no state string, pagination becomes quite difficult there.
Yeah, you wouldn't know they
you
actually
can always
line
find
up.
the references from the objects themselves.
Yeah, I think that should be really the encouraged way.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on blob, or shall we move on? All right, thank you. I will, I guess, post responses to what's happened here to the mailing list, possibly do an updated draft with the advice around fetching size from blobs, and then ask Jim to do a working group last call again. Yep, pop one up.
Hi, I'm Joris Baum. I just have a question about is it still planned to make a new document based on Jmap blob management extension for files, or Jmap for files or something? Is that still in scope of the
That's
Jmap?
separate from blob itself. Blob is just for creating the blobs, which you would then add to files. So yes, that Jmap for files is still something there's interest in.
Okay.
But yeah, it would use this as an upload mechanism rather than extending this document.
It could maybe that could also be the place to have like a query functionality. I don't know if it probably will have more metadata associated with it.
Yeah, the thing is, you might not have your calendar events and your emails appear as files via the files or storage node API.
Yeah.
So you still need to be able to get look at all the things that you're interested in to find out which blobs they reference.
Okay.
Cool. That's not what I meant. Share slides. So Back on the chair slides for a second. Next on our agenda is Jmap quotas.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, I'm René. So yeah, I'm gonna present quickly. I mean, what's new in Jmap quota? Not so much, to be honest. Do I control the slides or not?
You can if you share them. Would you like me to do that?
I mean, you can just push. It's just one slide after this one anyway.
So if you, there you go, pass slide control. You should now be able to control the slides.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So, I mean, there's not much changes lately, but I mean, thanks to Neil that did a few more feedback. So I think it's pretty stable now. So in quota capability, I mean, yeah, it was useless to have quota IDs. We can just fetch them with quota/get method. For the scope and resource type as well, I mean, we don't need to specify some custom extension. I mean, we can just keep it simple with the standard, and if people want to make extensions of it, I mean, they can do it themselves. And then the resource type, just renaming size to octet, so it's more clear about what we want here. And limit as well, a bit more generic definition. And that's pretty much it. So if people have questions or maybe feedbacks on quotas, I mean, yeah, you're free to ask questions here or to answer the mailing list as well. Okay. I guess I can give you the hand back, Ron.
Yeah, cool. No one has popped. Alexei has popped into the queue. Alexei. Go ahead, Alexei.
Okay.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, just my apologies. I haven't read the latest document, but now that the Imap quota RFC is about to be published, I can give full attention to your document to make sure it's consistent with mine, or at least if there are differences, then we discuss and agree why they are a good thing. So
okay, yes.
Basically, I sorry I haven't read the recent version, but I'll have a look.
Okay, thank you, Alexei.
All right, anybody else?
All right.
Great.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Probably after your review, yes. Yeah, I think, okay, I'll do a working group last call on this document, and that will lead us to reviews. Next up is Jmap Sharing. So I guess I can share it and then, oh, no, it's already being shared. Fantastic. I do not need to do that. Or is that me sharing? It's hard to tell.
I think it's you sharing.
It's me sharing. So I hit share and it says a new slide deck has been shared, which is not true. It's me trying to look in here to see if I have any slides for Jmap Sharing, and I do not appear to have any slides for Jmap Sharing.
Yes, sorry about that. I don't actually have any sharing. I just have some for calendars. Fine. Sharing, though, actually, it's pretty complete. I was just having a look at that again before this meeting, and I think it needs a bit of wordsmithing just to make sure everything is as clear as possible. But it's reasonably short. It's only kind of 10 pages, I think, in RFC format, and reasonably straightforward. So that one could possibly progress pretty soon. I don't know whether we want to wait to do it at the same time as calendars and stuff, but it's not exactly tied to it. It's kind of, it's related, but
I think just
yeah.
go
So,
ahead in that case. So one more update and then working group last call.
yeah, I think that should be fine.
Cool.
I don't have any open issues or no any concerns particularly about that one.
Anybody have anything for sharing?
Otherwise, let's move on to calendars where I've got a few things to discuss.
All right, I will find the calendar slides. And I think I can pass control over to you, Neil.
Yes, excellent.
There you go.
Cool. Okay, so since the last meeting, been quite a few updates. We've got quite a bit of implementation experience with this now, which has been great, mainly for surfacing just little edge cases which needed to be properly documented. So that's obviously why we do that before we try and publish this. There are still a few questions also that came up whilst from the implementation experience. So I just want to talk through a few of those and see what people in the room have to say about things. Any thoughts? So I'll just step through that now. Now, the first one of these is actually one of those ones where when I was writing it up, I realized kind of the answer was kind of obvious, but I'll just talk through it briefly anyway, because it's kind of interesting. There's a concept that I've called whether the server is the source of an event. And I wonder whether that's actually the best way of naming this. But essentially, this comes down to whether it was created on that server or whether it was created, say, on completely different server run by a different company, but you received an IETF message that added it. And that affects a few things in terms of how it behaves. For example, whether when you update the event, it's sending an RSVP or whether it's sending out the invitations to all the other people. And you can't just look at the ACLs here because you have full permission to edit it. It's just that actually you shouldn't edit most of it because you're not really the one that controls it, and another update may completely blather your changes. So generally, clients already have this concept. I don't know what other clients call it necessarily, but they look at the organizer to know and see is that someone they know as you to determine whether they think this is the source or not. But that won't necessarily work in all circumstances because you might have a per event or per account reply to address, which lets you do some nice other things, but it means it's not necessarily easy to work out whether this event is the source of this event is this server that you're on or somewhere else. So basically the upshot of this is I think we probably do need to add a new property to the event that the server will set when you create it for the server to say, does it think it's the source of this event or not? So the client can change its behavior based on this. So I guess, first of all, just any objections to that? And also, does anyone know of a kind of standard naming for this concept or other names, or should I stick with source as kind of a name for that?
Right, you go ahead, Barry.
This is Barry Lieba. How about is controller? I mean, does that ring better than source?
It's certainly reasonable.
It's what I was going to say, and it's the word you were using to describe the concept as you were talking about it.
Right,
One
okay.
thing I did want to add to this is that, did I just turn myself off? The one thing I wanted to add to it is that for import-export, you will need a way to set controller on the server, tell the server you're importing this data, and by the way, you're taking over control of it.
Well, I don't know about that because it's defined at the moment in the spec of that the server is the source if it will receive messages sent to the reply to, sent to the organizer, essentially. And so it will know that even when you import them, you won't need to set it explicitly. It's just that the client can't necessarily know that because it doesn't know all of the addresses that the server might receive stuff on, but the server does. So I don't know you do need that for import.
So it's just a matter of saying that there has to be some way to set it on the server, but not necessarily via Jmap, I guess.
Yeah, the server has to know what it can receive on, but yeah, I don't. I don't think it needs to be anything in the JMap particularly for that. That's more about identity management, really.
Cool. So it's read-only but mutable.
It's read-only, but yeah, I guess potentially mutable by the server if it changes, yeah, which addresses it receives from. It might suddenly decide, actually, I am now the source for this event, I guess.
Cool.
Joris?
So I'm Joris Baum. So I just wanted to state that I also added a source property for Jmap for tasks currently. So this is supposed to signal if a task comes from was automatically created from a mail or originated from a web application or a mobile application. So just to put that out there, that it might be confusing to have is source and source at the same time with different semantic meanings.
I've suddenly thought, I wonder if like is remote event or something is switched around the thing rather than is controller. I don't know. Maybe people can think about it and email a list if they have other thoughts. But yeah, it looks like source is not the best term to describe this, so we should come up with something better because it turns out to be a reasonably important concept that's referenced a few times in the spec for different behavioral things you need to do.
I'm hearing bike shed on the mailing list here.
Yeah, that seems fair. Okay, let's move on.
Call the property aquamarine and everyone will.
Okay. So the next question is back about default calendars. And first of all, does there have to be one for each account? Or can there be none set, which basically means at that point you can pick whichever calendar you want if you need one, like to add an incoming invitation to, for example. The spec currently says no, which is based on our previous discussion, as I recall, just because it's like you're picking one at random anyway, so why bother just say explicitly I didn't pick one, I don't know which one is default. But CalDev mandates one. I think Ken reminded me, so perhaps we should match. So anyone got thoughts on that? And then also it is mandated, like what happens if in
Jim
the various
popped
edge
in the
cases.
queue. I'm not sure whether it's for this or the previous thing, but Jim, go ahead.
End of the is source discussion. I haven't had a chance to think about this very much, but is there by the way, I've got a long echo that I'm hearing, so that's why I'm talking a little bit funny here. I'll try to ignore it. But is there any sort of a security aspect to who has the right to send an update to an event? And is there a question of whether the Jmap server can be trusted to not change that property inappropriately?
So this is talking about the source stuff again, I presume.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think, yeah, we presume that you trust your own calendar server to not do something deliberately malicious because it has all of your data already anyway.
And you're about to write all the changes back to it, so.
Yes. And in terms of processing the updates and the security bits around that, whether you should accept like a change of stuff that's kind of out of scope of Jmap, that's part of IETF, really.
Okay, thanks.
Barry.
This is Barry Lieba. Well, this back to the default calendar thing. This seems to be analogous to the Imap inbox, where Imap specifies things that you have to have an inbox. If you delete it, it gets recreated. With inbox, if you rename it, then a new one is created with the name inbox. You probably don't want that for this, but maybe you want to do the same kind of thing with this as Imap does with inbox. So basically, Alexei just said, so basically you're saying yes to default, and I'm saying, yeah, probably, especially if CalDev requires it, it would be useful to have that specified as some standard behavior in Jmap calendar.
Ken.
Ken Murchison, yeah, I'm clearly in favor of default calendar as it's mandated by CalDev, and if you've got a server that's automatically processing IETF, whether it's implicit scheduling or via IMAP, you need to put new invites someplace. So if the user expects to receive invites, they need a calendar, and they need to tell us which one it's going to go to. And if you've only got one calendar, well, then that's the default. If you've got more, then you tell us which one it's going to be. But I think we need to have at least one calendar if they expect to have scheduling work.
So does that mean there must always be at least one calendar in the account, I presume, which is fine, I guess, and also...
Yeah, yes, I'd say yes, because if you don't have any calendars, what's the point of you trying to use
Yes,
JSON for calendar?
you'd have to
or Jmap for
need
calendars?
it. So then what happens if you try and delete the default, I think is the next question.
I'd say you'd have to create a new default before you delete the existing one.
You just can't if it's currently the default.
If it's the only calendar you have, I'd say we prohibit you from deleting it. And Barry gives me a thumbs up, so he's in agreement with that.
And I guess, well, if you look at the slide, then you also get questions of, are there other conditions? Like, what if this is a read-only calendar? So I can't actually add stuff to it. So I have a calendar, but it's not sufficient to be my default calendar, if that makes sense. Do we have restrictions on what can be set
But that's
as your
where,
default
this is
based on
Barry
the
again,
apples?
that's where I said it's analogous to IMAP. In IMAP, the inbox can't be read-only, and like I said, if you can't fail to have an inbox.
Yeah.
Yes. So this is kind of, again, based on what Pete and Barry just discussed, perhaps what we do is you do not have to have a default calendar, but in that case, you aren't able to schedule.
Yeah.
If all you want are read-only calendars because they're subscriptions, fine, but don't expect invites to go anywhere because you've got no place to put them. And as Pete said, it's like the inbox, right? If you don't have an inbox, you're not receiving mail, but you can certainly read mail in other mailboxes.
There are certainly servers where you can not have an inbox, and then when mail arrives, it gets auto-created, and then the mail put in it.
Mm-hmm.
This is Robert speaking. So I have to say I don't care so much if a default calendar must be specified. So I find it perfectly reasonable that the default calendar ID on the preferences might be null. But it, of course, must still be then, we could still state that servers might then pick whatever calendar they want to put an invite into. And if there is no calendar, as we said, as has been said before, well, then there is no invite can't be delivered at all anyway. But separate from the fact if you can set or cannot set the default calendar ID to null, what we are doing in our implementation currently, we allow to delete the default calendar, but we immediately pick a new one. So this might also be stated in the spec then that the server might pick a new default calendar immediately after the destroy, or it might not. That depends on the implementation.
Yeah, actually, that sounds quite reasonable to me, because that's lets the server decide, but it doesn't actually have that's interoperable, regardless of what the server does, because it tells the client what it did.
Yeah, then I think it might make sense if we decide on that to put it also in the spec where it's currently saying that it's possible to destroy default calendar and then it's set to null. Still make clear that the server might choose what it deems appropriate in that situation. And that being said, for participant identities, which we map to the calendar user address set property, I think these two properties in CalDev and Jmap should be aligned. But the CalDev spec in 6638 definitely says that if the property is destroyed in CalDev, then this disables scheduling for that account. So in that regard, it speaks to me that the participant identities in Jmap must be non-empty as well. I think it shouldn't implement the magic that if there are no participant identities, then scheduling is off. If one
I would have thought
yeah.
probably the server, the server obviously is allowed to reject any time you try and destroy stuff, and I would imagine it won't let you destroy whatever your username identity, for example. It might let you destroy extra ones you've added, but not.
Yes. What I'm trying to set is also that it shouldn't be a magic by having or having not participant identities to allow scheduling for an account or not. If we want to disable scheduling for an account, there should be some appropriate flag
Yes.
in the
Yeah, I
capabilities
agree.
or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, Alexei, very quick note, maybe it was sort of overtaken by events, but the question I would ask is, what are the benefits of not having a default calendar? Maybe answer to this question will help you decide, I don't know.
Yeah, it's more kind of a data consistency thing. It's hard to, if you say you can't delete the default one, so you have to end up doing this dance where you create a new one, assign a different default, then it's easier, I think, if you can allow it to delete the default. But then there's the question of what happens at that point, basically,
I
and
think
that's
you
where
need to
it's like,
specify that, and actually from IMAP experience, there are certain operations that allow multiple outcomes, and it's actually having multiple outcomes is more difficult to code for clients. So if you can decide on one, then you either don't allow deletion, or if it's deleted, it can always be recreated, well, unless there are reasons not to. But if you can't, the two choices might be okay.
okay.
Yeah, the cases like undo are particularly messy if the server starts doing magic under the hood and you have to work out how to revert that magic if you accidentally deleted your last calendar, and then you've got a whole mess to clean up. And the offline case where you've scheduled a bunch of operations, you don't necessarily want, the default calendar changed meanwhile, and so one of my operations failed. Anyway.
All right, this is Hans-Jörg again. One more point, so I think I'm also in favor of having definitely a default calendar, because I'm not aware of a single other system that doesn't have that. So some systems even only have the default calendar, groupware systems and so on. I also wonder, from a UI perspective, if there wouldn't be anyone, what would the UI display? Would it, need the user to create a calendar first? I think that would be also very weird. And another point, it was mentioned before, if I delete the default calendar, some other calendar might be promoted to be the default calendar. I just want to raise the point that typically the default calendar in most systems, since it pre-exists, doesn't have a particular name. So some systems give it some weird name like default, or the identity of the user or something like that. And so some systems might get confused if the default calendar, after such a delete operation and another calendar is promoted to be default, has now a proper name. So there might also be internationalization issues with that, because UIs will have the default calendar displayed typically with a predefined string in the system and not with a user given name. And that might be broken if you promote another calendar to be the default calendar. So the case I'm making here is probably not being able to delete the default calendar and make another calendar the default calendar.
I don't entirely agree with that. I think I understood that. Like you can choose a different calendar to be your default, like in CalDAV, and it can have an arbitrary name. I don't think any client just shows the word default.
The server can
that.
always reject the operation.
And the server can always reject stuff if it has, exactly.
It's not a strong point, but certainly it's something from my experience with clients that might lead to weird results, even if it's specified incorrectly.
Yeah.
Ken Murchison again. I can't speak to the potential problems that Hans-Jörg just brought up, but to try to clarify my previous thoughts on this and wrap things up. So my opinion is, if the user expects to have scheduling, they need at least one read-write calendar. The default calendar essentially is a user option that if they have multiple read-write calendars, they tell you which one they would like new invites to go into. It's not a mandatory thing on the server. It's a user preference. This is where I want to see all my new invites. That's really all it is in CalDAV. And I don't think we should make it more than what that is in Jmap. So it's a user preference. If they want scheduling, you have to have at least one read-write. I don't care if you call it default or not, because it's only one, so it's the default by default.
Yeah.
It's really in the concept if you have more than one read-write calendar.
All right. Should we move on?
Yep, let's move on. Thanks for that, everyone. So this is about default alerts on calendars. So we've discussed this a bit before, that you can have specify default alerts on calendars, and then you can specify an event to use default alerts and just get whatever the ones are on the calendar that's in. So the first question is about, if I create a new calendar, should the server copy over the default alerts from your default calendar, if you have a default calendar, I think from the previous discussion. Because at the moment, the spec just says the default is null, so if you create a new calendar, it doesn't have any default alerts until you explicitly add them. I think, again, while I was writing up this slide, I came to the conclusion, and so I'll just see if other people disagree with it, which was that this can actually be made vendor specific because of the way Jmap works. The server will return if it set anything like copied over the ones from your default calendar, and the client can always explicitly set null or whatever it wants on create if it doesn't want the server to pick something. So does anyone disagree with that?
Ken in the queue.
So this is Ken again. So given what I had just said about the default calendar being a preference as opposed to an actual entity, I would like to see default alerts maybe be attached to the principal or whatever we're calling that in Jmap. Since that's
the principal.
That's the highest
trouble
order
is
thing on the server
Yeah.
regarding the user.
Well, yeah, I was trying to avoid having yet another level of hierarchy, because does that mean that they might inherit from? So if you say you use default alerts, so they inherit from the calendar, but then the calendar might inherit from the principal.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily up here to argue whether we should or should not have inheritance. I'm just saying, because of default calendar being a preference and not an entity, you really can't attach anything to it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, in this case, it's not attaching anything to it in the spec as such. It's just saying that when you create a new calendar, if you don't explicitly set,
if you have one, okay. All right, that's a
yeah,
different story.
all I'm saying really here is, if you create a new calendar and the client doesn't explicitly say use these default alerts, including the category of I don't want any, then the server is allowed to set whatever default alerts it wants, which might be copying over from your default calendar or might be something entirely different. Whatever, it's going to tell the client, so it's up to the server.
If the server does inherit it, then they should probably be returned as part of the create response, so the user knows what happened and can change it.
Exactly, they would have to be. Yeah, because that's already
yeah.
part of the core spec of Jmap. If the server sets it and it's not explicitly set by the client, the server has to tell the client what it did.
I'm comfortable with that.
Cool. Possibly the more interesting question is the one at the bottom of this slide here, which is, are you allowed to set default alerts on a calendar if you don't have the may update private ACL, which is the ACL you need to be able to update alerts on individual events in that calendar?
Anyone want to pop in for that?
Does that require more thinking?
My opinion is that no, you shouldn't be able to.
That does seem reasonable. Like, yeah, if I can't set alerts on individual events, why should I be allowed to set default alerts?
Robert?
Yeah, so probably I misunderstood the question then. Yeah, but since I have the mic, I agree. If you don't have the may update private, it doesn't really make any sense to set the default alerts. You can't even then toggle if you want to use default alerts on the event or not. So
no, but suppose that it was set to true because, by whatever source set that.
Okay, so
what does that mean then?
It wouldn't be set to true for you. It would be set, well, that brings up the question that we currently have around shared calendars, but by the default value of the JS calendar object, it would default to false. So
yeah,
in that case, you wouldn't need to be able to set them for this calendar. At the moment where a sharee of a shared calendar defaults to true with use default alerts, then I think it definitely needs to be possible for them to set the default alerts on the calendar. Otherwise, they don't get any alerts at all for the event.
Okay. But there's a few interactions there, I guess, like whether it's a team mode calendar or kind of secretary mode and stuff. Yeah.
It's okay, but what I'm trying to say is like, if the default value for use default alerts ever changes to true under which circumstances any, then under these circumstances it must also be allowed to set default alerts, because otherwise it's really, it isn't useful to default to true in that situation, because there will never ever be any alerts then.
Yeah. I'll go check the cases and try and come up with something sane. Cool. All right. Unless anyone else has something on that, I'll just move on. This one's simply we've got this calendar preferences object we talked about last time, and we've got to store now what the default calendar is and what your default participant is, your default identity is. Do we want to put anything else in there for now? I mean, I'm sure at some point this will get extended, but is there anything else we want in the initial version of it? The one thing that came to mind is the user's first day of week preference, which is just a cultural thing. If you want Monday or Sunday as the first day of your week, or in a few cases Saturday and some other stuff, but mostly it's going to be one of those two. Is that worth putting in here, or do we just keep it simple for now? It's just the default identity and calendar, or is there anything else people think is worth storing here as a kind of at the data model layer, so every client has access to it?
Default time zone?
Time zone is attached to the principles.
Cool. Yeah.
This is Ken again. So if we expect multiple different clients to be speaking Jmap for calendars, would the user might want to have their preferred date time format stored in this preferences?
Certainly, yeah. If you were storing first day of week, that would make sense as well. Like, yeah, or like day, month, year, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, order thing. Yeah, that's good point.
Cool. Thanks, Ken. Daniel.
Apologies for asking a question that maybe everybody else here already knows. I'm not sure I understand why default time zone would be a principal level thing as opposed to a per calendar thing. If I'm scheduling for a group that regularly meets on East Coast time, I want that calendar to default to East Coast time. And if I'm scheduling for a group that meets in UTC, I want that group to meet in UTC. So this seems analogous.
Calendars also have a time zone, but if it's null, then it inherits from the principal that owns the calendar.
I see. So why not use that same mechanism for first day of week?
Because it doesn't actually affect any of the scheduling. This is purely a kind of display preference, if you like.
Yeah, so
okay.
The question was more, should it just go on the principal as well?
The stuff on the principal is more stuff that's required for scheduling, and like if you were looking up someone else in your company to schedule something with, whereas this to me is just purely a user preference, which is why it's in a separate place. But
that sounds like it belongs the same place that the the date format belongs as well, right? Like everybody wants to see it in their own perspective.
Exactly.
But
yeah,
won't
that's
affect
what
change.
Ken just said. Yeah, I agree. I think that's something worth storing here as well if we do first day of week. Okay. Final slide of question stuff I have is just an IANA one. So the spec lists a set of properties which are treated as per user properties. So this means if you're in team mode, then each user that's accessing the calendar, they can write to the properties, but they would just get their own copy of them. It doesn't affect the other users, like your alerts, for example. So that if we both have a shared calendar with the team meeting next week, I could have an alert 2 hours before, and Bron could have an alert the day before. So at the moment, the list of properties that are considered per user is hard-coded in the spec. Do we want to have this in a registry somewhere? Probably. Like, it seems possible that there might be others in the future that you want to treat in the same way. And if so, do we modify the JS calendar spec, which already lists all the properties, but to add like an extra column to say whether it should be treated per user in Jmap calendars, or is this something we should create just a separate Jmap calendars registry for?
Just popping myself in the queue for this one. I think we should modify the existing registry. It's going to be easier to update both things in one place rather than creating a separate registry which has the same keys in it, just a subset of them.
Is that reasonably easy to do? I've never tried to kind of update a registry in that way before. I
Ken
guess
just
so.
agreed with that.
Kind of
Iana can do that. Just tell
Yeah.
them what you want done.
Yeah. Yeah, that does sound the most reasonable then, because
Alexi
yeah, you've
says
just
add
got
a
one
column,
place.
that's fine.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
That sounds good to me then. Great. So just wrapping up. I think we're almost there with this now. Implementation experience has been great. I need to make changes based on the discussions we've had here, and add some examples, which I still haven't done yet, but hopefully none of that's going to take too long, and I hope to get this to last school before the next IETF meeting, fingers crossed.
Cool. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you.
Anything else before we move on to the next topic? Excellent. Next is Jmap tasks. Sorry, Neil, I just turned off your audio because this system is very good at moving things under you when you're about to click. I will put Jmap tasks up unless you want to share it from your phone and hand you the microphone.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Joris Baum. So, yeah, I'm just going to present you what the last changes are of Jmap for tasks, and yeah, present you some of the, like most of the changes resulted from the survey that I did last time. And I also prepared some discussion points that resulted from this survey. So if you can continue to the next slide. Yes, so here again is a link to the survey I published on GitHub. The goal of the survey was to make Jmap for tasks a more common standard that's not only specific to groupware systems, but also specific to Kanban boards or issue trackers. So the idea is to extend the spec here and there to make it a more common thing. You can move on. Yeah, so I started with some more obvious, or for me at least, obvious properties that I added to the spec. And here's a list of the changes, basically. So the first thing I added is a source property that I saw in several systems. So this describes where a task. Also, these are only changes to the task object for now. They're not for the task list object. So the source property describes from where the task comes from. There are some systems that can automatically create or can create a task from an email, or they tag a certain task as it was created from a mobile app. Yeah. That's just basically a simple string value. Then there's also a next value is estimated work, which is similar to estimated duration, which was already there, but it's more of an more abstract estimation of the amount of work required for a certain task, which is a more or less popular thing in Kanban. So you don't have a time estimate, you have more like a more abstract measure. Then there's an impact property, which is also a simple string, which is more popular in issue tracking, which has some values like major or block,
for example. And then there's the progress property. I extended the progress property with some more values, which you will see in the next slide. And then I slipped in a small mistake that nobody noticed, and I just noticed it like a few days after I published the spec. I added related to, which was already in JS Calendar. It's, what I wanted to do is to extend the relation object with more values. So related to can also contain blocked by, for example. Currently it contains values like child, next, things like that. Okay, if we can go on to the next slide. Yeah, so the progress property is a bit of a bigger change. There already were certain values for it. The progress property basically displays, the progress of a certain task, and there already was needs action, in process, completed, failed, and cancelled, and there are just a bunch of other values that exist in various systems. So what I tried to do, I tried to come up with a mapping from those various values that I saw, and added some more values that I thought were necessary in order to have a more complete mapping. So for example, there are some simple systems that have only done or not done, which was not so obvious for me how to map a simple done or not done progress indicator. And also, yes, there are some issue tracking specific values like deferred or waiting or resolved or feedback. So basically this is the mapping here I came up with. I also mentioned that in the spec, so that other people implementing it know how to which value to choose for their own system that they want to implement it for. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe there are already some thoughts on this. I think the next slide is going to be other properties for discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it looks good, and I think it would be just simple to add these to the registry as allowed values for the enums in. I'm not sure if is it also for is it for iCalendar V to dos? I think we already have the needs action in process completed already, or not, or is it just in the task draft? But nevertheless, for JS Calendar, yeah, I think it should be just a thing of extending the existing registry with these values.
Okay. All right. Then if you can move to the next, would be nice. Yes. So one big thing from the survey was grouping the properties somehow. So right now there are quite a lot of properties, and the plan is to add a bunch of more properties to it's mainly to the JS calendar object, or the JS event object. So the idea here is to group it somehow, because there are some systems that just don't need certain properties, and for example, issue trackers, they typically don't want to have some scheduling mechanism built in, or recurrent issues in an issue tracker are just not really a thing. So yeah, so that's like a big one that I wanted to discuss first, because I think it's kind of a big change. So yeah, so it contains a lot of groupware specific properties right now. That's why I tried to split it into groups, and the idea here was to split it into certain feature sets, but keep it in line with Jmap. So use the
capability mechanism to display what the server understands, what the client understands, but also not make it all too fine-grained at the same time. So we don't want to have 20 different capabilities. Yeah. So, and one thing I wanted to note is that if we go that road, then systems will need to implement a bit more than they absolutely need. But I think that's just I don't know, that's just necessary. And what we can do is we can make sure the overhead is just small enough for Kanban boards or issue trackers to have some interest in the current spec. Yeah, okay.
Thank you for this work. Can we go one slide prior? I just had a comment on the chat that I was asked to take to the mic. Confirmed seems orthogonal to the other states here. And it sounds to me like each task has exactly one progress property. And so I don't know how you're expecting, like how do I indicate that something is, say, confirmed and deferred, or confirmed and in process? That seems a little bit confusing. I'm also not sure why we have both resolved and completed. I wouldn't know which one to pick in most contexts.
Okay, so you want to have deferred and which one?
Well,
For example?
confirmed seems orthogonal to the other states.
Yeah.
I think there is already a confirmed as a separate property in JS Calendar. I'll jump in.
What? Can you repeat that? Where does the sound come from? I'm not exactly sure where. So what I did, my methodology was that I looked at the issue tracking systems, and they have not only a progress, like a status property, but they have several other properties like impact that I already mentioned, but there's also another one. So I'm not sure if there is an issue tracker out there where you can confirm something and have it, I don't know, assigned at the same time.
Well, I'm not suggesting this problem is specific to your document here. I've certainly seen issue trackers where there is a separate state that is confirmed, but it is not assigned. But I know that I use issue trackers where whether something is confirmed or not is independent of whether it is assigned. It's useful to know,
Okay.
you know, here's something that someone's actually been able to replicate, for example. So
All
it's
right.
just it doesn't seem related to this. I really don't understand the difference between resolved and completed, though. That would be another thing worth clarifying if you're going to drop these in the spec.
Yeah. So, okay. What? Yeah, I think, if I remember correctly, if it's resolved, then it has been fixed actually. But if it has been completed, it's done basically. So the issue it's like a won't fix. It could be a won't fix. You know, it's the same as closed. You just don't work on it any longer. But if it's resolved, then it's actually, yeah, you actually fixed something. That's, yeah, maybe I need to specify that a little bit more. That's a very good feedback, because yeah, me too. I think the whole terminology is not very obvious. I agree. Yeah, but maybe also it would need some splitting up. It's a good feedback that I need to look into it a bit deeper.
So this is Ken again. So I stood up for the next slide, but just to chime in on the resolve completed, I tend to agree that they probably are the same thing, and the language that's used in the UI is just a UI thing. unless we can clarify those in the spec as to what the actual difference between the two are and where they expect to be used.
Yeah.
Brian, can you go to the next slide real quick? Sure. So I apologize, I haven't read the current spec, but regarding the grouping thing, so
Yes.
just to wrap my head around the issue, are there mandatory properties in JS event that the task folks don't want to see? Or, I'm trying to figure out why we need to either remove, not show properties in the event. That's the intent that I think I'm getting from what's going on here.
Not show?
Or am I way off base?
Not show.
Not show, okay. And what's the reason for not showing them? Because they're not apropos
No.
to tasks, or?
I just wanted to understand. Sorry, you said if there are not show properties, or
No,
I didn't quite get that.
I'm trying to wrap my head around why we need the grouping. So, what's the end goal with grouping these?
Yeah.
Is
So
my question.
so the way I understood it, a server still needs to understand, or if you have a server that implements the whole JS calendar spec, and it tells you with its capability that it's able to understand it, then you expect it to understand all the properties, even though they're optional or not. You can just leave out the not optional properties. But yeah, it's basically a capability thing. Yeah?
Please.
Yeah, it's just replying. You can. I'm not sure how the procedure is for that. So this is Hans-Jörg replying. Yeah. So this is Hans-Jörg replying to Ken a little bit. I think the reason, or what we found out in the survey, I think that was presented at the last IETF, is a little bit that we found that task systems in general are much heterogeneous than the calendar systems. So for instance, each calendar system typically will include recurrences, whereas this is rather exceptional even in groupware systems. So some like Google Tasks, for instance, there is no such thing as such a recurrence. And so we argued somehow if you want to use this also for an interoperability issue, like systems might adopt Jmap for interoperability as a standard API. Tasks in difference to calendars will require some sort of a differentiation, because there are certainly a lot of task systems around not having recurrences at all. And so we need some sort of a mechanism in order to.
Let Neil jump in and then he does on the rest.
Can I maybe just finish? I have 2 more slides or 3 more about grouping, actually.
We should hear what Neil has.
Okay. Okay.
I don't remember. I think it was just that I think the grouping idea with like a reasonably small set of capabilities, but that can divide up, kind of like you've said there, seems like a reasonable idea. We'll have to see, the details in the spec, but I think the general idea sounds good to me.
Okay. Yeah. So the current idea here is, I don't know, to group. The way I try to solve it is that I currently have a grouping of 3 different groups. So the common properties across all task systems, and there's time estimation features that are that are about the do properties or the estimated work, for example. And there's also advanced scheduling properties, like recurrences, recurrent tasks, or some automated scheduling features. So if you can go on to the next slide, I have them a bit. Yes, okay. So there again, the three ones. Yes. So and here is a list of the classes that would be inside the common group. I don't want to go through all of them. It's just to get you like a glimpse what was my first initial idea of having in there. So for example, I don't know, color, title, things that are just very, very common, or also a bit more outlandish, but so it makes sense to group them somehow. If you continue to the next one are the time estimation properties. which basically would add alerts and time zone classes, and yeah, also add some time estimation properties, as I said, the estimated work, estimated duration. If you click to the next one, then there's the advanced scheduling, which would add recurrent rule class and end day class, and add a bunch of properties like free busy status, recurrent specific properties as well. So yeah, that's the first idea of grouping that, and as you can see, it's quite a lot already, and I just think to spark interest for issue tracking and also Kanban boards, it makes sense to, yeah, so either we say it's not really required to implement the whole thing in general, or we say it's there are certain sets that you can choose from. Like, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, this is Ken again. So I think I finally understand where we're going here. So
Okay.
I think rather than specifying which properties go in various groups, I think you should just come up with different levels of capability. So anything in common, which you describe in the text, would essentially be mandatory to implement for tasks, which we need to be interoperable anyways. And either Barry or Pete probably would have said that before I did. Then if you've got other levels of feature sets, you describe in the text what that feature set entails in terms of properties, and just make those sub-capabilities underneath the actual JS task capability. So within the object, you say supports time estimation, true, false, advanced scheduling, true, false, and whatever else you might end up in there. I think that's probably the easiest way to go about this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's nice, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
So if that grouping comes, then I would suggest to also introduce a new set error for a task set, so that you don't have necessarily, an invalid properties error might not be appropriate because the system most likely will know about the property but decides not to implement it. So probably, I don't know, like a not supported set error that might even give the required capability might be a good thing, but yeah, I would just suggest to use a set error that can be discerned from a regular invalid properties error.
All right.
Sorry about that. Yeah, but on the other hand, it needs to know that it only advertises in its capabilities a subset of the JS task properties. So in a way, I would expect the implementation to be able to at least know about properties it doesn't support. So, but anyway.
This is Ken again. So agreeing with Robert that for the base draft, yes, an implementation should know if it's excluding certain features and properties. But if there's an extension to this draft down the road, you can't expect the current implementation to know what hasn't been implemented yet. So I can see there's a case for unsupported capability, but then for other things that it's totally unaware of, not supported, still makes sense.
Okay.
I guess I'm in favor of both. One's more descriptive than the other one. You fall back to not supported if you have no idea what's coming at you.
Okay. All right. So if you could, the next, how much time do I have left, roughly? Is it fine? Okay. So here again, I wrote down a mapping between different task systems and the groups that I currently am using, just to double check that the grouping kind of makes sense. So for groupware system, obviously we typically want to have all of them. So common group, time estimation, scheduling, you just want that.
Then the simple is supposed to be a very simple task application. It's just do, done. I didn't write down a specific system for that, but yeah, you can imagine there is one out there that doesn't need time estimation or advanced scheduling. For Kanban systems, yeah, they would typically use a time estimation thing, but they could do without recurrences and scheduling properties. For example, Microsoft Planner, Nextcloud Deck, and Trello. And for issue tracking systems, they typically make do with the common group already, with some slight exception for Jira and Redmine. They have one do property, as I saw. Yeah, but I think roughly it kind of looks like it makes sense right now, the groups that I chose. But yeah, of course, it's not the final iteration. So, okay, if you could go to the next slide. Yes, blob created. I already sent a mail to the mailing list about that. So I saw that in several systems as well. So they tag an attachment basically with the time it was created, it was uploaded. The first question I would have is, do we actually want to have this in the spec? It's not a very important thing, I think, but it's a nice to have, I would say. And yeah, and if you want this, yeah. So I think the mailing list discussion ended with we could use it as an extension, add it as an extension to an object that references a blob and not to the blob itself. Yeah, so yeah, maybe Neil already has an opinion on that.
Yes, I was just going to say it should definitely be the thing that references the blob that has the created. I mean, that's the thing that has all the metadata. The blob itself is just the bytes of data. Like you can't assume that it could reuse it between users, even if to save space and reference count it. Like the metadata is all in the thing that's referencing it. So that's where that should go if you have it.
All right. So, and the question that I have is, would that be for JS calendar, it would be for this particular thing, it would be the links, the link object. So I'm not sure, would we just extend the link object with a single property, or would that be sufficient? I don't know.
Yeah, you can, everything's in a registry, so it's easy to add properties on it. We can just say that the created property is allowed to be set on the link object as well to represent when that's created. I think that'd be reasonably forward.
Okay.
Yeah, as I wrote on the mailing list already, yeah, we could add the created timestamp to the link object. If we do that, I'd rather say we should add it to any object, because why only for link then? If you really want to track the timestamp when this object was added. And with that being said, I promised 2 IETFs ago to come up with a spec that tracks property changes in a that fits all Jmap object types basically. So we could also take this as an initiative now to where this might be already useful. Yeah? So
yeah,
I would even prefer the last, but it means more work for me. But I might find time to come up with a draft and that it comes quite in time for Jmap tasks too.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay.
Yes. For a second. I was going to say, I think that's somewhat orthogonal to this. The created time on a file is when the file was created, which is not necessarily when you added it to the Jmap store. You want to say, here I'm uploading a file, and this is the creation time from the file system. I want to say this file was created 6 months ago, and that you're not going to be able to. A Jmap event history is not going to give you that, so it would be a separate property.
Yeah, this is what I wrote on the mailing list. So it very much depends on the semantics of the created timestamp. If it's the created timestamp for the link, then I would assume that's when the link object was created. when it's the created timestamp for the underlying data on disk, then that's something different. So I don't know what's the purpose of the created timestamp in this context.
I would say there's no big consensus on this. Like, I would need to look a bit deeper, but I think it's fine if we come up with a solution that fits for us. Yeah.
This is Hans-Jörg. I think that this is somehow related to what Neil mentioned before. I think that's a Jmap specific topic here, because you have that blob storage which allows you to reference objects from many potential items, which is something you typically can't do in most other systems. So I think what we're talking about here is really like when the user linked it to the actual item, irrespective of when the actual file was already created, which I understand in a Jmap system might even be from another user probably. I don't know. Yeah, so I think what we're talking about here is really in the context of the item, the link, the time of linking.
Yes. All right. So there's not much left. So keywords was already discussed in the mailing list already. I think that makes a lot of sense to have a, what was that, keyword color property for the task list with the colors that we have for each keyword, and then have a separate keyword property, or change the keyword property to be not a simple string, but something a bit more complex. As already discussed on the mailing list. It probably makes sense to keep that in sync with the categories property, so to be able to do that with that as well. And it might also make sense to do that in Jmap for calendars as well, to not be able to do that for tasks only, but also for calendar events. Is there an opinion on that?
It's not something I've seen implemented in calendars at the moment. Once you start adding these extra properties like this, it makes me wonder whether it should be a separate data type. Like, is this, you should have a task list object. It's another way of, it's like a label essentially, and then you just reference that.
I very much like the proposal that Bron has written on the mailing list for that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we basically, as I understood, we want to keep that out from
Discuss on the
Jmap for
mailing list.
calendars right now. But yeah, it might make sense to sync that with categories as well. So, okay. Yes, future work is basically we still have to get some more feedback, or from the task system vendors. We already prepared something for that. Still needs to happen, and also there are still two more or less complex properties like comment, which we don't want to exclude because a lot of systems is very important for a lot of systems as well. And the history property was already teased in previous meetings. We still have yet to tackle that one. Yeah.
Okay, I just have short comments for the properties that were mentioned at the beginning. So
okay.
For estimated work, I think this property is useful. I'm not so sure if it's useful if it has an arbitrary number in it, because I would assume that the meaning of these numbers will differ by teams or by products. So yeah, I'm not sure how much value is in allowing just any number without giving hints what number range indicates what. For the impact property, I wonder if that can be, if that is necessary, if the priority property is enough. And what was the last? Yeah, for the source property, I wonder how much value it provides if it's just a free text. If would different implementations put the same thing in, or could there be an enumeration of typical cases where the source property is set? Or should that be the product ID of whatever product generated was the source of that task? Yeah, so I'm not sure how a free text value alone will be interoperable between systems.
Okay. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry.
I'll just present from here.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Alexei.
And I will make it quick because the document hasn't been updated. Next slide. So yeah, as a reminder, this is to Jmap extension to allow signing and or encrypting on send. So there are two Boolean attributes added. By default, they are absent, and neither signing or no encryption would happen. If both are specified, then its first message is first signed and encrypted. Next slide. Three-ish open issues. One is to what extent we need to control how the signed message is generated. There are two common ways of doing this, using multi-part sign or application PKS7 MIME. If I don't get any feedback, then tentatively I probably suggest that there is a Boolean to control this, with application PKS7 MIME being the default. As far as header protection is concerned, LAMP's working group is working on this, and actually this IETF will announce that we made some progress on this, so there is some hope that this document will complete. So I would say, yes, we probably need to have another Boolean to control this for backward compatibility, with the default being probably no, don't protect headers. And then the last question is whether this needs to be extended for SMIME decryption. And, well, there is one way of doing this through decrypted blobs.
Cool. Daniel's just popped up in the queue. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, Alexei may feel differently about where we're landing on the header protection draft, but I believe we're in the position where the default should be able to be true, because I think the generated messages won't actually have problems. So I think it'd be a shame if if we baked a default of false in here for header protection.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
The second question is about how do you think the SMIME signing, we're talking about delegating here secret keys to the Jmap server?
Yes.
Okay. That definitely changes the idea of end-to-end at some level.
Yes, and
depending on how things are
it's
deployed.
a slightly different trust model, right?
Yeah, the theory here is that maybe the Jmap server and the Jmap client are within devices under your control, so that is still your end for that purpose. Jmap's not really designed so much to only pass encrypted blobs. If you did, then there's no point having this at all. So if you are using this, it's because you believe that you control the server as well, and so it's part of your end.
Okay.
So, yeah, I will at least implement the first two changes next time, and then we can talk about decryption, which is it's kind of complementary feature, but it will require a different approach. I want to go this way.
Cool. Yeah, that's the last slide. Yeah, so what I think I understood from that was that we could make it be default to, was it signing true if you request the capability for this. Obviously, if you don't request the capability, then this property doesn't exist, but we could default it to true if you do request it.
I think DKG was talking about header protection, actually.
Okay.
If you want to if you do either signing or encryption, by default header protection will be true unless you,
Okay.
you disable it.
Yes, Alexa has it right.
Cool. Thank you. Awesome. With that, we're basically done with the Jmap portion of this, other than having a quick glance at the milestones. But we might leave that just to the end and move on to extra, if that works for people, just because we're running over time. So looking at the agenda for extra, the first item we had on here was extra quota, which is with the editors. Is there anything to say on extra quota?
No, RFC editor basically noticed that some text on IANA website was out of date. I sent a separate ticket to IANA to update it. It's sort of a procedural. I think they don't want to publish RFC unless this is sorted. But even like the page saying, you know, who approved the RFC publication already disappeared. So I assume that it's sort of like it's near imminent, basically.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so the next thing on our agenda is Civ Action Registry.
Yes, very quickly about this. Basically, the registry itself, the template is relatively straightforward, and then the main part of the job was to actually populate it with initial registrations, which helpfully Ken just did. So he's now co-editor. I think we have one little pending things about reject. We want to add a comment saying that it, with which actions it conflicts, which might be useful information. But basically, I think people need to check what we've done. And you might as well send it to working group last call.
All right, next on the list is not actually what the slides are up there for, because I don't appear to have slides for Civ Snooze.
Yeah, this is Ken regarding Civ Snooze. No updates to the draft. It's been implemented in Cyrus IMAP. It's been deployed at Fastmail. It works as intended, as expected. Barring any other feedback, I'd like to ask for working group last call.
All right, anybody have any feedback on that before we go to working group last call?
I checked the diff and it was like minimal clarification, so I think it hasn't changed recently, so it's just done.
All right, we now, since it's up there, we might as well talk about process IMAP.
Sure, so this is an idea. I sent an email to the mailing list a few months back sketching out what we intended to implement in Cyrus IMAP. Went back and forth between an action to a test back to an action. I finally documented what we have implemented in Cyrus IMAP, which is on the next slide. So this is what it looks like. We've got 5 different options there. The first one is a list of addresses if they are outside of what the server would normally know. This is analogous to the addresses parameter in vacation, so that the user would tell the server, these are the identities that I have, normally email addresses. So any invite or reply that I get for one of these addresses, you can go ahead and process for me. Next set is it's a mutual exclusive pair. You can give it a calendar ID onto which you expect new invites to go onto, which goes back to our previous default calendar discussion. Alternately, if you do not want to get spammed with invites from untrusted users, you can tell the server only process updates, which would mean replies from other users. I'm sorry, it would mean updates only, meaning changes from an existing event on your calendar or a cancel or that kind of thing. Third option, we tell the server, if I do receive a cancel, please remove this from my calendar. And then the other 2 are optional if you've got the variables extension enabled. 2 different variable names, one to give you a set of fixed strings, what the outcome of the action was. This could be anything from no action to updated to added. and I think there's one other one in the spec, I forget what it is off the top of my head. And the last option is another optional variable, which would give you a human-readable string explaining the actual outcome, most notably if it's an error or a failure. So that's what we have. I'm here to see if there's interest from anybody else in moving this forward and formalizing this as a spec. This has been implemented, again, as I said, in Cyrus Imap. We deployed it to some of our users last week, and it appears to be doing what we've had previously done in middleware as opposed to directly in Civ.
Alexei Melnikov. So yeah, I've scanned this today quickly. Seems to make sense. Couple of comments is one. First, it's probably the first case when you have extra output parameters on an action, but I suppose, when there are two extensions, but, it's not in any obvious way wrong, it's just unusual, but I think that's a fine solution. As far as the outcome values concerned, I think it would be better if you split update and cancel into the two different values. It just, I don't know, it seems canceling and possibly removing the event might mean something different from just updating it. So I might want to do something different based on that. The other comment is, now that CF action is going to be in last call, we need to add it to the document.
Yeah, this is kind of, I realized that last week and didn't get a chance to push another update, figuring that I got added unknowingly to the Civ action spec. I should probably follow that spec. There actually is a example of what this looks like on the next slide, but it still doesn't change the question out there is if anybody else feels this is worth adopting in the working group and moving forward.
Hi, this is Jörg. I have just a tiny question, and maybe I have to admit I didn't read the draft yet. But my question is, from what I see, I'm asking myself, is there a standard way IMAP is currently implemented in systems? Because it's, I guess, not really standardized how it's done architecturally, and this somehow hooks in, somehow of kind of a dependency, which in some systems might create architectural issues in some way, which is not necessarily an overall issue, but I'm just wondering, this is something one should maybe state for potential implementers of this. That there might be wider ranging consequences of implementing that.
So to answer your first question, the only two ways that I'm aware of currently that this is done is A, the email clients do the processing, okay, or B, the provider has some other out-of-band facility for doing so, which is what we did previously. So this is just a different way to have the user be in control of what's going to happen in a standardized way. And I'm sorry, your second question was what?
Maybe I come back to it afterwards. More about understanding that.
Yeah, fine.
I mean, just thinking aloud, before probably IMAP processing might have been unconditional on hard-coded how it's handled. Now you can say only accept invitations from this set of people, for example, and do a few fancy things. So slightly more control.
Yeah, to that point, this currently does not give you the ability to say, I want to accept from this set of users, but I believe yes, I believe there's other facilities within Civ to do exactly that, especially using the list extension. So you could have it reach into your card dev, address book, or whatever. This does not tell you when to do the processing. It tells you how to do the processing if you choose to have it done.
Yes.
So does this have to be does this go to the list to adopt this, or just?
Yeah, I'll do a call for adoption on the list.
Okay.
It sounds like there's nobody violently objecting to the idea, so we may as well go ahead.
If adopted, I may rope Lexi in as a co-author.
We cannot just co-edit everything. Yeah, I mean, not everybody will implement it, but I think it's a sensible idea to do in this working group.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. There were more slides, but they're just examples, yeah? Beautiful. All right, fantastic. Then all we have left in all of this is IMAP partial.
Right. I actually updated the title of the document because it actually has sort of two related extensions now. But, yeah. So, do people remember what partial is all about? Do you want to know? Okay. So, basically in IMAP, if you do search, typically search will do the full mailbox search. You can say only return n messages, n first or second page or whatever. This helps the client to receive less data, as well as saves server work. Once it reaches the number of messages, it can stop doing it. Somewhat similar example is with UID fetch. You can have a UID range where you don't actually necessarily know how many messages in the range. So again, you say, if my client can only show 10,000 messages, there is no reason to return 100,000, if it's so many in the range. So you can say, just return me first, or, yeah, next slide. And, I mean, for smaller mailboxes, it doesn't matter that much, but this is concerned with large mailboxes, say 50K and more. So as I said, search return option for returning page, or, well, it's a range of messages in the response. And also, so it's a search modifier and UID fetch modifier. Next slide. So this is how it looks. This example says return 100 messages from the end of the mailbox, the most recent ones. If you don't use minus syntax, then it's the first one from the beginning of the mailbox. But so this was partially motivated by Yahoo people. They want to do better handling of very large mailboxes, and their most common case is going to be the most recent one.
I have a question about this one.
Yeah.
That's not only allowing negative numbers, it's also reversing the order. It's got the higher numbered one first. Is that deliberate and supposed to be allowed, or is that a...
What? -1, -100, or -100, -1. This should be the same.
Yeah, the ranges are not,
Did-
you specify the...
What happens if you mix
Okay.
a minus and a positive then?
You cannot
I
have
had
negative and positive. You either use both negatives or both positives.
Oh, okay.
So either range at the most recent one, or in the kind of the least recent one. So the partial positive number colon positive number was original part of 5267, so it's backward compatible. But this ends the negative syntax to say from the most recent messages, so you don't necessarily need to know UIDs for them, for example. One positive and one negative, or vice versa, is an error. Okay. Next slide. Cool. And this is how the fetch example works. Again, if you know how many messages in the range, or in the UID fetch range, that is not as useful. But if you don't, or if you want to page through results, then it gives you more control over this. Next slide. Yeah, so we do have wonderful problem in Imap where we have so many extensions we sometimes forget how they interact with each other. So actually, partial existed before, save existed before. Save is do the search and save the result in a variable, right? And the interaction between the two weren't actually specified. So Timothy Reinen from DAFCode asked about interactions, and now this is clarified. Next slide. So there were actually a fair amount of changes since version 0, but most of them were not related to the partial. The main clarification about partial is that if it's used with constore, it is explicit how they use together. So you can say, send me flag changes for all messages, change this timestamp, and only return so many of them. So the other extension is message limit, where server basically insists that you cannot request any operation on more than so many messages. I mean, obviously, if the limit is 10 messages, it's not going to be very useful, but this is supposed to be like 10,000 or 100,000 messages or whatever. This is of more interest to Yahoo people because they try to avoid storing full maps of message numbers to UIDs. So it's kind of easier for them to page through numbers and resolve indexes this way. So various revisions clarified interaction with sort. I think a message limit and sort can be used together, but you either need to have a special index, or you say, well, this mailbox is too big, so I cannot do it.
Yeah.
Thread and message limit cannot be used together if the mailbox has more than message limit messages. It's just not going to work. Because threading doesn't work with partial data, basically. Well, it sort of gives you corrupted threads, which are not very useful. I don't remember. Do I have a next slide?
Yep, 2 more.
Okay. One of the main open issues is copy and UID copy. One of the things that this is trying to address is the client can say, well, I want to copy all messages from the mailbox to another mailbox. You have 100,000 messages, message limit is 10,000. So do you just fail to do the operation altogether, or do you copy 10,000 messages and say, well, I only partially completed, you need to retry with the remainder of them, if you care. This is kind of tricky because we never had copy fail partially before, but this is trying to, do we want to all the clients that don't support this become unusable because they don't understand this response code, or so that's kind of a tricky question.
I have an opinion. I think we should reject it outright rather than allow it to succeed, because otherwise the clients will just try again and again, and they will wind up copying the same 10,000 messages again and again to the destination folder first.
No, it's not how it works. I mean, yes, it might be a valid reason, but the way it works at the moment is it says copy 100,000 messages. It will copy 10,000 and return OK with message limit.
Mm-hmm.
So the naive client will say, oh, all the 100,000 messages got copied, but actually only 10,000 were copied.
And then it will try and delete all of them, and it will only delete the same 10,000, assuming it hits the same limit.
Yes.
So,
well, the alternative is, the client just cannot do it, and then it's like, well, does it try to repeat itself or just give up? I don't know.
Yeah, or the client has to do batch copies of.
Well, that's the thing. The client basically needs to be updated to know about the limit and do it batches. I don't know. I keep flipping back and forth about this. This is kind of tricky, but we can discuss. Yeah.
I don't necessarily have an opinion on this issue, but just something else to bring up, which is probably going to be painful. Does this, if any way, shape, or form, affect renaming of the inbox, that abomination where you're copying? Yes. Barry has an opinion.
Sorry, I didn't push the button, but this is Barry. Not on what Ken just said, but the other bit. We previously don't have any stuff in IMAP where the server puts limits on things that the client may not know about that affects the client's behavior, and this is the first that I'm aware of. I don't like that. I don't like the idea that a client that tries to copy 100 messages and only gets 10 of them copied doesn't, if they haven't been updated to understand this, they have no way of dealing with that situation. And I think that's bad. So I think that if the server has a limit and the client tries to do something above that limit, it just gets no, and nothing happens. And then a client that understands message limit knows what to do with that, or shouldn't have done it in the first place. But a client that doesn't know just has to throw up its hands because it has no way to recover.
So basically it will be, arguably not a lot of servers will implement this because this is kind of a little bit of more niche as opposed to partial. Partial is generic facility. What we are saying, users will try their clients with a server like this, will be unable to do it, will have to complain to their client. Client says, well, I didn't implement this. Why do I want to? Then there is a discussion with the server vendor whether they want to implement it. Yeah. Okay. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, this is basically what I said as well. That it should be rejected, and then you either do a smaller copy of just a range of messages, which the user can do, or you fix the client.
Yeah, this is why I struggle. There is no, it's unfortunate situation, and there is no elegant solution that will just sort of, it's kind of a, yeah.
And still, Barry, to go to what Ken said with what do you do if you rename inbox, I think that has to be an exception to message limit. I think the server just has to do it. Even if the server has a message limit of 100 and there are 10,000 messages in the inbox and you rename the inbox, well, the server can say no, or the server just has to do it and move all 10,000. Right. Whatever.
And if the server is distributed and have a client part and server part, well, then they'll have to update the client part to actually support this, and then it should work. But I mean, can you actually send this in send the email to the mailing list, because I think it's probably worth just saying this explicitly. No, send a reminder to the mailing list saying what about rename inbox with more than message limit messages, what will happen, and we'll just say server just has to do this. We can add an explicit statement as a reminder for server implementations to do this.
Great, thanks Alexei. Is that everything? You got one more slide. Next step. Seems ready for last call with partial. Message limit may need a bit more work. Who wants to implement? Yeah.
This is Ken. So as a server dev, I think partial is pretty straightforward to implement. Question for Alexei, as a client dev, have you actually implemented on your side so you know it operates the way you expect it to operate? Because I'd like to see some running code before we go to last call.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I actually did implement it on the client side, but I didn't test it with my server yet. So that's why I was hesitating. I did it, but I think it's fine. It actually makes handling of big mailbox like webmail clients. If you can only display 10 pages or 15 messages, it makes it much easier to implement because you don't need to download, the whole map for 100.
Yeah, I was mostly concerned with does the spec do what you need it to do, more so than I was worried about interoperability at this point.
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. We have 5 minutes left. Let's run through our milestones quick. Hey. Thanks everybody. here we go. Yes, I do want to share my screen. This one.
I mean, I put the message limit and partial in the same document. Do you want me to split them up, or is it okay if we'll just keep it for now?
I think that should be fine to stay in the same document, and we'll just do one if it's going to.
Well, it's also if we decide that one of them is more experimental than the other, but until we get there, that's fine. Probably.
Yep. I'm happy to have a working group last call on this as one or two documents and have to do a separate working group adoption call, sorry, on one or two. All right, here's what we've got. Submit document for blobs via Jmap to ASG is going to have to move forwards to next month, basically. Submit civ document to ISG. That's also for April, I guess. We decided that civ, the Jmap civ is ready for last call.
I was hanging on to this because I wanted to get some implementation experience with the civ test method.
Okay.
But if we want, I could break that out and we could make it an extension down the road.
No, I think it should be fine just to, we can test that within a month. We send it to working group last call and test it during that time.
Fine.
SMIME sender extensions. We're ready to last call that now, Alexi? No. Well, I haven't updated it, so. Fair enough. There is 00 now, but when? Let's do August. Cool. Guides implementation of Imap servers and proxies. Kick it down the road. Cool. Jmap access to address books. This is, what do you reckon, Robert? We're back on Jmap now, so. Jmap calendars, we said, is nearly ready to go, isn't it? Don't know, it's pretty late for him. No, I think he might have headed off to bed already. From the implementation perspective, I mean, yep. I think it's very late already. I'll say July. We'll get it by next IETF. JSON contact document, and I need to move that because it belongs in the other work group now. I'll just hit delete on that. Murray, go ahead.
Yes.
What did you have to say? We hear
Oh,
you.
the first one that you edited, you set it for April 2021.
Did I?
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Roll down there, right there.
Thank you. Okay. Ta. That's, I mean, it should have been done by April 2021, but we're where we are. Thank you for that. I've deleted the JS context that's being moved. Jmap quotas we said was basically ready to go. And that says June, all right. We'll say August. It would be nice if we get some stuff done. You can working group last call it now. Yep. Just give us lead time to things. Yep. Done. Review changes, all done. Okay, and milestones for extra. We had Civ Actions Registry, adopt. That got done. So just resolve that. EAI with Civ. Yeah. That was just for adopt. So adopt. I think we've adopted it already. I think I'm just going to resolve that. No. Okay. Might say adopt by June, submit by December, and that leaves update charter, which is for extra, not done. But we were going to update the charter given that we've done stuff, but we didn't. We chartered email core instead. Murray, do you want to comment on this?
What am I commenting on?
Whether we want to update the charter for extra, given that it's currently whatever it is. Not that. Right, all data tracker loads.
I was just looking at it. What do we want to cover that's not in there already?
Yep. This was more whether we were going to. This was going to take on the other email-related stuff. But
the stuff that was brought up in dispatch this morning.
This was before email core started. I think we decided to question whether it was going to happen here or not. Yeah, the discussion that happened in dispatch this morning. I think probably that whole question will either just close the update charter here, delete it, and work out what we want to do later.
Yeah, I don't think we have to include an updated charter as a milestone, so that's fine to delete.
Yep. Awesome. We will put those changes through then, and we are done, which is good because we're 1 minute over. Thanks, everybody. Good work. See you tomorrow. What? All right. Barry's going to do a thing. All right. There we go. Well, you got the infinite thing. I need to turn off my screen. I say grant, and you now have permission. There you go. You are now sharing slides. Go ahead. Oh, everyone's gathered around Barry. All right, thank you to both of my chairs for helping out in this weird combined session. Particularly Jim taking notes. Very much appreciate it. Have a great evening, everybody, or morning, or wherever you are. And thanks for joining us.
Sure thing. The hybrid session worked pretty well, actually.
Yeah, we did all right. See you all next time. Hello. What's up? It was a little bit wild not having a microphone at the table. I had to hold this thing the whole time.